All right, the central group started in 2010 as a result of the big inflight in 2009. The group, we'll show a map here in a few minutes where the land base it encompasses, but it's primarily the Slave Lake region and the Woodlands region around Whitecourt, Fox Creek. At that point, the group enlisted 4 corps, was Forestry Corps, to look at the data management compilation amongst all the groups, ESRD as well, and start developing spread models for our region. We primarily enlisted 4 corps to look at the impacts of our treatment, so both the level 1 by ESRD, our harvesting, and if it ever gets to kind of the level 2 treatments where we're kind of going after mountain pine beetle stands. We felt this group, initially it was really to understand what was going on in the region and also to kind of get our area kind of on the radar screen of the province and kind of make sure we were heard. It's now more of helping to coordinate plans between ESRD and the industry to make sure we're not treating the same areas. That's one big item. We don't want to cut and burn a single tree and then go in there and log all the surrounding trees 2 weeks later. So we just have more of a coordinated effort this way, and it helps keep the lines of communication open. Bob will be talking about all the challenges related to data, spread model, and everything that goes with that.
So, as everybody knows, 2009 was a big year. Since then, beetles advanced in the central region, has advanced further south and east, and the rate is composed of stand to stand, not large inflights. So there hasn't been a large inflight coming from BC or even within the region. It's just been stand to stand spread up to a kilometer or so within that region. Overall picture: some areas in the inactive zone, so the province has the leading edge, and the holding zone in the inactive zone. Some areas in the inactive zone, such as FMU's S21, have seen pretty close to 100% pine mortality, and those areas are pretty much in salvage mode. We don't do a whole lot of analysis there anymore because it's just go get to what's left. Other areas, such as in the leading edge, you see a slow advancement of the beetle year to year, but it is advancing. It's being knocked back by level 1 treatments, but it is pretty slow relative to the big inflight that we saw in 2009. The surveys that the ESRD has been doing, as Dan said, has been a mixture of strategies. So some have been helicopter, some have been orthophoto, and then as the mountain pine beetle extent has moved, the extent of the surveys has moved with those. So there's some areas that were surveyed, shown to be heavily infested with mountain pine beetle. The next year they may not have been surveyed because there was not much point in surveying the other 50% of the trees that were now dying. So as we try to do an analysis from year to year, comparing year to year, the moving survey boundaries has presented a bit of a challenge from a looking back perspective as to what's changed, because not all areas were surveyed from year to year. So it's just a challenge to try to compare from one year to the next. So now I'm going to show a series of maps, just where some of the surveys show. So in 2009, the surveys were mostly done by helicopter, I believe, and so some areas up in here were just large polygons, and there's a bunch of trees, infested percentage of trees. So that sort of data was a bit of a challenge to deal with from a perspective of how much is going to spread, because you didn't know in which AVI polygon those trees were in. So it was applied across the board. Down this area, there's quite a bit of infestation, but that the level of detail there was much more specific. It was point data in this point within a radius of 50 meters, how many trees are infested in that radius. So that gave us very good information to start doing spread modeling, spreading out where it might go to. If the population builds up enough, it might get into the next standover, that sort of thing. 2010, there's no large polygons. Most of the surveys done in 2010 were based on done on the orthophotos and the semi-automated interpretation of those orthophotos. You also notice up in here very large concentrations. So in 2011, those were dropped from the survey areas. So to compare 2010 to 2011, what the change was, not so easy to do, other than we knew that most of that area was taken care of. So in 2011, we see a very big change. So we go back from 10 to 11. You can see that there's areas that aren't surveyed in the next year, which is fine, which is great, because that's where we're trying to deal with it, is at the leading edge. But just doing a change analysis which was requested of us, was challenging to do. So we ended up doing a change analysis only where there was overlapping surveys. And now 2012, most of the survey is done in the leading edge, and unfortunately the colors are too but this almost follows the leading edge all the way around. There's almost no information, survey information. So to compare the total number of new red trees is challenging for the whole area. So now when we do a change analysis between areas that were surveyed in both 2011 and 2012, we see that the 2012 red tree survey is slightly higher in those areas than 2011, as the beetle moves into new stands, as the beetle moves into infest greater amounts in the existing stands where perhaps level 1 did not occur. And then applying the Mountain Pine Beetle spread model, predicted number of new infested trees is similar. We see similar growth based on the predictions. Just take a side step here. The Mountain Pine Beetle model that we built was built in conjunction with Dan Lux, and Drew, and Alan Carroll's input. It really is a very high-level strategic model. So it moves infested trees, can infest other trees around it based on probabilities, based on the site index of the host stand, based on the site of the, sorry, not site index, the SSI of the host stand, and also the SSI of the target stand. Mountain Pine Beetle model that we developed was more to generate what-if scenarios. What if you aggressively attacked infested stands by harvesting? What if you aggressively attacked stands with level 1 treatments? How does it compare to the existing harvest patterns that you're planning to do? Because it's not necessarily operational reality to go and cut down a stand that's highly infested if there's no roads anywhere near and it's all by itself. So just wanted to, the intent of it was to get some high-level knowledge of what was going on, what you could do to try to slow down the beetle spread, using both normal harvesting, level 2 harvesting where you're aggressively attacking the infested stands, and the level 1 harvesting. So every year we've been doing an annual action report / plan. This year the plan is concentrated on 5 FMUs that are the heaviest hit. So in the next 5 years, 60% of the planned harvest is in pure pine stands. I think that maybe that's not a very high percentage, but when you realize that this area has some pine, but there's a lot of mixed wood stands in there. So there's a lot of spruce aspen stands. So when 60% of the harvest is in pure pine, that's targeting almost all the pine. Another 16% is in pine mixed wood stands. Now the 29,000 trees were planned to be removed for level 1. Dan's number was about 20,000 in the central region that he showed this morning. So I don't. That's just probably just what ended up happening. So between the two, pretty aggressive action to go after the pine beetle and its habitat, and that's what was given to us, provided in the fall as their level 1 planned actions. So fairly aggressive in that leading edge in this area. The similar map for the Grand Prairie region is quite intense as well. The beetle spread rate over time is influenced by a number of things. As Dan mentioned this morning, we're seeing lower green to red ratios than was predicted in 2009. So the spread rates aren't, from stand to stand, from tree to tree, aren't as aggressive as we initially feared. In 2009 it was very challenging because of the huge influx of beetle coming from the inflight. So those it was really hard to tell what was going to survive and survive into the next year. There's a little bit due to there's less areas surveyed, so we don't really know what's happening from a tree-to-tree perspective and a stand-to-stand perspective in some of the areas that are heavily infested. But we're also seeing very aggressive level 1 by ESRD. Of course, always limited by operational feasibility and by budget. And we're also seeing pretty aggressive level 2 by the companies. Also limited by operational ability to get into some of these areas. And the block approval process of changing into stands that aren't necessarily part of the approved SHS or the approved AOP for that area. So what we found out of all our analysis, I'm not going to show any great graphs or anything like that, but what we found year to year consistently is level 1 and level 2 can work together to slow down the infestation rate. The challenge is really measuring how much it's slowed down, because there's so many variables involved, and there's only so much money to go after the question.
The balancing of the values, we heard this a few times, and Darren kind of took the wind out of my sail on a couple of these coming up, but we're always faced with that as managers on the landscape, both as companies and the government. And there's a ton of values out there. I've highlighted a few that are kind of in the spotlight right now. A week before the Mountain Pine Beetle episode aired on TV, a caribou episode aired on TV. It was a lot of people definitely paid attention to both in these regions. The next slide will kind of give you an idea of why they're so intermixed. Grizzly bear as well. We haven't heard about grizzly bear a lot lately, but 10, 15 years ago, that's where caribou is now. We also have the healthy pine strategy. So we have to balance all these. What type of forest do we want? As an industrial forester, we want a nice, healthy, vigorous pine that produces a lot of volume. We have mills that require this. There's different factors that caribou and grizzly bear may need. They might not coincide, so we have to figure out where that balance is. The timber utilization is a big question for us. We discuss that a lot at FRI, of at what point is it no longer usable. So once it's attacked, how long do we have to use that? And it depends on your facility. Each facility is different. So you have one that produces, in the Slave Lake region, they're producing plywood. They only have a year or so after they're attacked and dead. You have an OSB facility, pulp mills, they might be able to go a lot longer, 10, 15 years even, I've heard. Apparently Ainsworth and BC is now looking at OSB as an option for our pine beetle killed wood for OSB that no one else can use. But you don't just pop up a new mill. The communities, that's a big one. Most of us live in these communities, especially the industry players. We want to ensure those mills are healthy. Our families rely on it. The communities rely on it. And we're very aware of that balance. So Bob created this map just to show where they overlap these values. The hatch marks are the caribou zones. You definitely see it in the lower left-hand corner. That's the little smoky herd. That's the focal point for the caribou battle. And yeah, it's right there. The pine beetle's knocking on its doorstep, and it's sitting there as well. That happens to also be where big interest for forest harvesting is. Some of the largest land sales for oil and gas in the last 3 years have been in that region as well. Record-breaking land sales, actually. So a lot of pressure in there to balance those values, and it's going to be a tricky one. It's probably one of the biggest challenges facing the industry players right now, is balancing the huge amount of values, and I'm sure forest management branch is spending a whole lot of time on that as well. So this is where Darren kind of beat me to the punch, but currently there's a 20-year pine reduction strategy, and Starting in 2007, as you mentioned, that 75% of susceptible pine will be reduced in the next 20 years. The discussion floating around the industry, I guess, and the government is that there's a suggestion that it might be shifted to a 40-year time frame. We'd just like to suggest there's some caution around that. There's some pretty big implications in making big policy shifts. Just an example, we have when the shift to the 20-year pine came into play, that decision, once it's put out there, isn't taken lightly. To implement something like that's huge for an industry player. You don't just increase in some areas, that results in a huge increase in how much wood you have to harvest in a year, a significant amount. And just to be able to turn that switch on, you can't just do it overnight. You either have to add shifts to your mill if you can handle it. You may have to increase the capacity of your existing mill. In some cases in our region, a new mill was built to handle that capacity. So the companies took it serious and invested a large amount of money in this based on this strategy. Shifting to the 40-year time frame may be the right thing to do in some areas. It may not. I'm not sure. But we just have to understand that flicking the switch down now isn't as simple as that right now. You don't just turn off a mill. Families have moved to those communities. Lots of money's been invested. You don't just turn that off. A suggestion is, we don't want everyone to sit on their hands and not look at this. We want policy to move forward. We would just like it to be investigated appropriately before anything is done. It may be more prudent to have a localized solution as opposed to a blanket 40-year across the province or 20. There's in the central region, amongst all the FMAs that are there, pine represents only 20-25% of the land base. In others, it's 85%. So when you make a blanket policy shift like this, the implications are significantly different on each end of the spectrum. So that's a big one for us. So going ahead to just a summary, challenges in modeling and determining effectiveness of treatments is big for us. So those areas that aren't surveyed every year or are taken off the list, it often results in kind of misleading numbers. We'll say we've only detected this many trees for treatment this year. We're worried on occasion that projects an image that there is less red pine within that region. It may not be the case. That's what's been identified for treatment, or that's what's been surveyed. There's areas that Bob pointed out on the map that we just don't look at anymore, but there's still lots of red trees dying there, and we just want to make sure the message is going out that this is still a big threat, and we don't want people to get complacent. So that's why we formed the group along with ESRD, is just to make sure locally and at the provincial level that message is still being heard all the time. Again, it's difficult to maintain that healthy pine strategy and along with all the other values. And I'm pretty sure caribou will be the #1 issue in the near future. Again, just want to emphasize that we want a cautious approach to the big shift in policy. 2017 is going to be that focal point, and I think the next couple of years leading up to that there'll probably be some shifts there prior to that. So the industry players in our group definitely want to be involved in that conversation. So we're hoping to continue that discussion. And we just we agree that the treatments seem to be working. It's hard to tell for sure. Just the anecdotal information we get going out on the ground. Everyone has boots on the ground, so it appears to be working. We can see evidence of the ESRD treatments all the time when we're out there harvesting, and we see that it stopped the beetle in those particular stands that we've harvested. So we'd like to thank ESRD for all that effort and keeping us informed all the time. Dan's group has been really good in having our group come to Edmonton and review the process. Cena and Dale, and for a while there Ed, have really kept us in the loop, and we appreciate all the hard work they've done. So